Greetings to the family, to all of those of the Run Tell That family. Greetings. And this Wednesday, this evening, we have a special edition, a special segment of Run Tell That. And what's going on that some of you who have been around, you're familiar with regards to a matter called the Weeping Time, and with regards to property, and with regards to history. And so tonight, we're going to be having a discussion led by a presentation, a virtual presentation done by Dr. Ann Bailey, a scholar who is also understanding the importance of where we are and what we are about. So it's essential. And I throw this out there and say that not only regionally, locally, but nationally, internationally, folks understand the importance of valuing their history, valuing the lands, valuing the areas where they are, and also letting people know about it. It is important for you to value who you are. It's a part of your connection, because you are not here by yourself. You are here because the ancestors and others made it possible. But what comes into play, you must acknowledge it and you must remember it. In fact, the United Nations and UNESCO and all others are going around the world and saying that we need to value the history of people because they made it possible for us to be here today. And so Dr. Bailey has done the same thing for us here in this area. Now expanded so that now we understand the national and the regional and also international implications. Dr. Bailey, we're glad to have you with us this evening on Run Tell That. And I will share this with you, that you do know some people here in this area, and they are a little prejudicial. One is the producer, Julius Hall, another producer, Crystal, and the Reverend Dr. Leonard Smalls. They tend to have an issue when I give the history of the greatest high school in Savannah, Chapman County, Georgia. So you don't have to immerse yourself in that battle, but we just want to understand, we are glad to have you here with us on Run Tell That. And to all those listening and looking at us, share. Again, Dr. Bailey, you have the floor. And again, it's an honor to have you to talk about the Weeping Time and why is it important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toure. And I'm so glad that that is not what I'm being asked to mediate today, because I have a feeling that I would not come out very successful if I had to choose between you. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm now going to just share my presentation slides and we'll move from there.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. I first want to just say, how are you all doing? I hope you are well. I am very happy to be here with you. If not for our situation with COVID, I would be there in person, as I spend a lot of time in Georgia and a lot of time in Savannah over the years. First, let me just say thank you, some quick thank yous to Reverend Leonard Small of Litway Missionary Baptist Church, to Pastor Larry Gordon of Solomon Temple, to you, Dr. Amir Toure, to Julius Hall, and also to the community group Hello Neighbor and Pat Gunn. There's a coalition of people who have come together and are trying to bring more awareness, among others, to the Weeping Time. And so I will probably not be able to mention every name, but those are some names I definitely want to say up front and say thank you for inviting me to this very important discussion today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ann C. Bailey. I'm an American citizen born in Jamaica from the Caribbean. I'm the daughter of Daphne Ramsey Bailey. I'm the granddaughter of Sarah Salmon Ramsey. I'm the great-granddaughter of Alfred Theophilus Salmon, and I'm the great-great-granddaughter of William Henry Mountain, born in 1825. All of those were teachers, by the way. I am so proud to be, as Dr. Toure says, I am here because they lived, they worked, and they sacrificed. I'm a historian and a storyteller. I teach African American and African diaspora studies in a global context. That means I teach African history, Caribbean history, African American history, even some South American history. I'm the director of the Harriet Tubman Center for the Study of Freedom and Equity, and that's at Binghamton University, where I've been teaching for the last 15 years. And I'm also co-chair of a panel that we launched after George Floyd's death, called the Truth and Reconciliation Panel, to address issues of equity. And you can feel free to ask me about that a little bit later if you want. The title of my talk is The Weeping Time, Why It Matters. The Weeping Time, Why It Matters. And if you will indulge me, I would like to just read from my book, just a few minutes. And I ask you just to come with me, if you will, and transport yourself back to the year, which is 1859, and hear the voices of the enslaved on the auction block. At exactly 11:55 on March 3rd, 1859, Dorcas, chattel number 278, was sold away from her first love, Jeffrey, a 23-year-old prime cotton hand. She stood on the auction block motionless, emptied of words, emptied of tears. She spent the greater part of that cold and rainy Thursday morning contemplating their final separation. Now the moment came, and she stood as still as a bronze cast, her head covered with a beaded gray shawl. She stared vacantly at the auctioneer, who with one stroke of his gavel declared a death knell on her future. Sold, young Negro wench in a family of 4 to the fine gentleman from South Carolina at 11:55 a.m., bellowed the auctioneer, William Walsh, as he pulled out his watch to check the time. He had a grandfatherly look, with a soft pearl gray beard that jutted out above his slightly protruding chest. He wore a double-vested black suit with several well-appointed pockets, one of which contained a shiny silver stopwatch that hung from a short chain. Dorcas might have expected a monster of a man with blood-red eyes and a cold, cobbled face. Then she might have surmised, unreasonably, how a man with one stroke of the gavel and the stop of a watch could separate her from the man she loved. Jeffrey, a tall, strapping field hand with soft eyes, who was sold earlier for $1,310 to another master, pulled off his hat, dropped to his knees, and wept. Just the day before, he had cherished high hopes. As soon as he was sold to a rice plantation owner of the Great Swamp, he spent the rest of the day begging and pleading with him to purchase Dorcas. I loves Dorcas, young master. I loves her well and true. She says she loves me, and I know she does. The good Lord knows I love her better than I love anyone in the whole wide world. Never can love another woman half as well. Please buy Dorcas, massa. We'd be good servants to you as long as we live. We'll be married soon, young massa, and the children will be healthy and strong, massa, and they'll be good servants too. Please buy Dorcas, young massa. We loves each other a heap. Really true, massa. When his new master seemed deaf to his pleas, he came up with another strategy. Young massa, he said in an almost businesslike manner. Dorcas, prime woman, A1 woman, sir. Tall gal, sir, long arms, strong, healthy, and can do a heap of work in a day. She's one of the best rice hands on the whole plantation, worth $1,200 easy, massa, and a first-rate bargain at that. These words seemed to move his new master, who looked at him obligingly and indicated he would consider his proposal. He approached Dorcas with white-gloved hands and first opened her lips to check her age. He turned her around as if spinning a top and bade her take off her turban. As she turned, his white-gloved hand would alternately brush against her back and breasts. He examined her limbs one by one and put his hands around her ample waist. Yes, these hips might be worth something. They might, in fact, breed a few children, all to his profit. He nodded approvingly at Jeffrey and agreed to bid on her the next day, providing the price was right. This was all the hope that Jeffrey needed. They would be together, he and his Dorcas. They would be far from home and family, but at least they would be together. They would be married, and they would create a new family. But when that hour came, Jeffrey's master did not comply. Had she been sold alone, he said, he would have raised his paddle for a bid. But Dorcas was not to be sold alone. At the last minute, Mr. Walsh, the auctioneer, had added her to a family of 4 to be sold as one lot to a South Carolina plantation. And so the thread that connected Jeffrey and Dorcas was undone. Dorcas was led away, and Jeffrey, who by this time was inconsolable, was joined by his friends. They stood in a circle around him, expressing no emotion, but standing guard of his. I want to give you that scene and want to share with you the way that I start the book, in part because I want you to realize that this is the heart of the story, that this is more than anything than you can imagine, that this is why we're here today. These lives that once lived at this plantation that you have a view of, and also on St. Simon's plantation. They came from both, near Darien, Georgia, just to the south of you. These lives literally were torn apart. And the reason they called the incident the weeping time was because scenes like you just heard were taking place over a 2-day period on March 2nd and March 3rd in 1859. They were brought from Darien to Savannah by railroad cars. And these railroad tracks are still all over West Savannah today, to this very area that you see right here in front of you. They were brought to the Tenbrook Racecourse, and the families were routinely, over that 2-day period, both existing families and potential families, as in the case of Jeffrey and Dorcas, who would have made a family, were broken up. And so from Darien, where they were, from Butler Island and St. Simon's, where they had a relatively quiet, they had a hard and difficult life, certainly as enslaved people, but in terms of being sold, they had not been sold very frequently. The average enslaved person in America could be sold as many as 6 times in a lifetime. And for these butler enslaved people, there was some kind of settled community. And so that made it even more difficult that they had not been used to being sold. And now they would be sold all over the South, in fact, all over the country. They now would have no sense of home. They now would be always in transition or in transit, if you will, just like many of the other enslaved population in the country. Now, who were they? They were people who, called themselves and saw themselves as Gullah Geechee community. They were from various West African ethnic groups, whether it's Bambara, Ewe, Fon, Fanti, Fulani, Hausa. They came from many different groups, but in general, they had a shared culture in terms of knowing how to plant rice and knowing, in fact, how to make their, we would say how to make the slave owners, those who thought they owned them, and they owned them in body, but not in spirit, I might add, how to make them very wealthy. In fact, one of the things the work that I try to do, and other people like Judith Carney with a book called Black Rice, is to show that these enslaved people didn't just come here like empty slates, and they didn't just come here with their brawn in terms of what they could physically do. They came with the interior intellectual knowledge of how to plant rice, because in West and Central Africa, their countrymen had been planting rice for hundreds of years and very successfully. And in fact, it's because of that success and that transfer of technology to the Low Country, including Southern Georgia, why on the eve of the Civil War, some of the richest men in America were rice planters. So you could think of them like the tech barons of their day, like the Facebook owners and so forth of their day, because of the work of these enslaved men and women, the very ones who were sold in the Weeping Time. So to say that they have already made a contribution is an understatement. They not only worked, and obviously they worked without compensation, but they also worshiped. And something I also try to bring out in my work is that their faith institutions were very important to them. And we see in the records very interesting, kind of a panorama of various ways in which they interact with their faith. They were largely Christian, but there were some Muslims as well. And they built and created churches, and also had to wrestle with the fact that some churches that they wanted to attend, they were not allowed to attend because of their color, or they were expected to attend by sitting in the back. You see there, one of the slides there, that the New Testament, you see that eventually, and I think that's something to be very proud of. The New Testament was written in Gullah Geechee language and has been available for many years now. So again, it speaks to the rich tradition of faith that they continue to have in spite of the duress of their lives as both workers and then eventually people who were sold away. So they worked, they worshiped, but they also fought for their freedom. And you see there are 2 names there that I have in red. Chattel number 256, that's Noble Walker, age 22, estimated born 1837, cotton prime man, sold for $1,236. Chattel number 260, James Walker, at the time of the sale, age 9, and sold for $1,236. It's so important to know that those 2 were among the almost 200,000 men and women, in fact, who fought for their freedom in the Civil War. So even after this traumatic an incredibly momentous sale that took place, and life-changing sale that took place in 1859 in West Savannah, right? 2 years later, only 2 years later, in the onset of the Civil War, we had these men and women actively trying to participate in the fight for their own freedom. Now, I don't think this is news to many of us to know that there is such a long tradition of service in the Black community, of serving their country before, including the Revolutionary War, during the Civil War, and certainly after, up until today. And so, again, the gift that they have given America, I think, is undeniable. Then there are the descendants. The gift continues to give. It's a continued gift. And that comes from their descendants, including people like Annette Holmes, who I also traced in this book. I also traced other descendants like, trying to make sure that my screen is working for you, Tiffany Young, who is both a descendant and a preservationist. And I traced up to 15% of the people that were sold on the auction block in West Savannah. I traced them to the modern day. And a number of these descendants, like Tiffany Young and Annette Holmes, had been doing a lot of this work themselves, and they are continuing to do so. Griffin Lotson is also among that group, and there are many others. But it's interesting to think about the fact that, though their story on some level began on the auction block, it didn't end there. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of people who have continued in a way that I find incredibly admirable to tell their story, to share their story, and to contribute in great ways to American society. That has got to be said. So what do I want to say about this? In the end, this is hidden history in many ways, because I think for a number of you, and I certainly have heard from some of the coalition, but others as well, and I knew this because I started doing work on this in 2005, 2006, thereabouts. And it wasn't very well known to me, even though I had been studying, the history of slavery and the slave trade for, many years and read countless books. And I knew it wasn't very well known to many people in the US, but it also wasn't well known even to people in Savannah and around and elsewhere in Georgia. So this is a kind of hidden history, which a number of people have come to at different stages and different times. And I want to just share some of that, like some of the markers. There's certainly more. The 1619 project, which I was proud to be a part of, which took a look at the last 400 years of African and African American presence in the US, did end. The end of the book of the 1619 project in the New York Times Magazine was recounting the story of the Weeping Time. So we have various markers. I continued this work in a follow-up article called They Sold Human Beings Here, also in the New York Times the following year, where we not only looked at the Weeping Time, but we looked at other auctions around the country. Because in fact, and this is something you need to think about, the Weeping Time is important because it was the largest slave auction in US history. But the fact is that between 1760 and 1860, there were more than 1.2 million slave sales. So we have the level of the domestic slave trade, as it's called, the level of sales, from one state, usually one southern state, to another, was tremendous. And even with such a tremendous background, you had the Weeping Time standing out because, almost 430 slaves were sold at one time in the 2-day period. So we have that. We also had, and I think all of these things have helped, Savannah, we had lots of Savannah media coverage. I think this was one particular story I just pointed to, I could have pointed to many others, where they talked about the fact that, Savannah was getting this national spotlight because the Weeping Time was being covered in these different things. I should also say that even before that, in 2008, a number of very wonderful interested parties came together and put together the largest slave sale in Georgia history, the Marker, that's on Augusta Avenue. And that was people like Martha Keeber and a group of people, the Georgia Historical Society, the city of Savannah, in fact. Lots of good folks were behind that. And likewise, in Darien, we also have a great memorial that was put together to also kind of mark, this was in this case, this was the last slave that was sold in the last slave that lived in Darien, Georgia. So memorials are important, and this is beginning to happen, but this is still somewhat relatively recent, as you can imagine. Here again, I want to stop for a second and just mention some more names. The first and the sixth here, and this was the first family to be sold. George, chattel number 1, age 27, born in 1832. Prime cotton planter, sold for $620. Chattel number 6, Molly, age 35, a full hand rice, sold for $695. I don't want you to forget the names. The names are so critical and so important to this story because they couldn't speak for themselves. We have to speak for them here in the present. But continuing on, when we start to think about, once again, what coverage there has been on this, in this kind of hidden history, I also want to give some acknowledgement to Dr. Kwesi DeGraff Hansen and his archaeological work in unearthing and landscape work in unearthing the Weeping Time, and also Chris Monroe, who wrote an excellent article in The Atlantic, also in the last number of years. So we've been slowly, a number of people, and again, I can't name everybody, but there have been, including descendants, writers, others, myself, who have been slowly unearthing this story and making it less hidden, making it something that, as it should be, it was iconic and it is iconic today. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. Why does it matter? If you have not figured that and discerned that already, let me just share with you these names. These names, for anybody who's been in DC, these are the names of Vietnam veterans who passed away. And this is the wall of, it's a wall of memory. I want to share also with you some other walls of memory. Here we have the Wall of Honor in the Whitney Plantation, another large plantation in Louisiana, where every person who was enslaved that they could find in the documents was honored with their name on this wall. Excellent work being done at the Whitney Plantation in Louisiana, and a very large area has been preserved to remember the work and the contribution of these enslaved people. But I want to take you further afield from the local and the national to the international, as Dr. Toure said. Here I have if you can see on the screen on your left, I believe, Polish Jews being loaded onto trains in Warsaw. Now, if you remember from, Holocaust history, Warsaw was one of the ghettos. That was the first Jews were rounded up and put in various ghettos. And one of the ghettos was called Warsaw, famous one. And first they were in ghettos, put in ghettos. And then when it came time, basically their time for extermination, they were rounded up and loaded into these trains. And I want you to note that they were rounded up and loaded into these trains. And what's important is that in the present, as you see on the picture on the right, is that Poland has now chosen, along with all the Holocaust memorials, and there are many across the world, and rightly so, there's no such thing as too many memorials. Poland has chosen in the very place where those trains and freight cars were, they have chosen to do another memorial. And once again, to add the names and the stories of the people who suffered there or suffered through this form of transit. I want you to think about that. Again, I think on the right, you see that's another view of what's going on in terms of when you get off the trains, you are in that area proper, and that whole area is to be memorialized. And I want you to think about that where it comes to the Weeping Time, because history doesn't fit in a narrow little box. That's just not how it works. We have our narrow boxes and property lines and so forth, but history doesn't work that way, not at all. And that's why in many cases with the Holocaust, especially, you see a memorial. There's a lot of memorialization around, not only in the camps themselves, but around the camps, around the train station areas, around the railways. I mean, you can look it up for yourself. Holocaust Memorial in in Washington does a great job of documenting all that. To your left, though, I also want you to note that there was also memorializing happening in the Netherlands with regard to rail companies. And that's interesting because just recently, now this is all very recent, and I want you to get a sense of we're part of something. It's a movement around the world. Just recently, in fact, last year, the Netherlands is paying reparations, okay, to Holocaust survivors. The Netherlands Rail Company is paying reparations to Holocaust survivors for their part and participation in the Holocaust. Here again, I have another picture, again, giving you that international view of areas around the official Auschwitz, campsite. These are being preserved as well. Nothing is being built on them, not at all. This is going to be preserved right now. This is real time. This is going to be preserved. They're seeking funding to preserve the very places where the SS officers actually lived and where they worked, with the train companies and so forth to bring their passengers there for such an awful fate as the final solution. Once again, history does not live and work in small boxes, not at all. It is a part of a much larger schemata. And I really invite you to think about that where it comes to the weeping time, that the whole area of West Savannah is historic. Every single inch of it is historic. I could also point to Robben Island in South Africa, where Mandela was a prisoner for 18 years, even though he was a prisoner for longer, but he spent 18 years there. And on the left, you see that Robben Island, the entire area is a historic place. And millions of visitors go every year to, acknowledge what they say. And I like the way they put it, kind of the strength of and the resilience of a people after this period of adversity in terms of apartheid. And of course, you see what a brilliant picture of Mandela there, just representing resilience in every way. We have Rwanda. So again, I could go on and on, but I like to give this example because this is the example of the Rwandan genocide in the early 1990s, where you had the Hutus and the Tutsis who, between the two of them, essentially 1 million people were killed. And so there are at least 6 major memorials in Rwanda. And in fact, Rwanda in Central Africa is an excellent example of a way to not only memorialize this history, but to come together and reconcile after, a period of great difficulty. And here we come back again to West Savannah and the weeping time. And I ask you to think about this. Think about the entire area as a place where a crime against humanity took place. But yet and still, we have in that area people who represent the resilience of a people, who represent, if you will, strength after a great period, even sometimes ongoing period of adversity. Once again, history does not stay within tight boundaries. A whole saga was unfolding here. And I would like you to think about that. In terms of this work and in terms of the international picture of what's going on. We are in what I would like to call, friends, an age of repair and an age of equity. This racial reckoning that we're going through is not an American thing. It is something going on in almost every place on earth right now. And it's fascinating. And people have asked me all the time, I'm being asked by reporters and others, how long will this last? Is this a temporary thing? Is this just kind of a trending? No. I can tell you, as somebody who is watching what's going on, not only here, but around the world, it's not temporary, it's continuing. Which side do we want to be on? Which side do we want? How do we want to go down in history? And I want to again come back to America and where we are and what's happening here. It's not just the weeping time. It's not just Savannah trying to struggle with these issues. You're not alone, as you can see. We know this. You just have to turn on the TV for a second and you know that we're in the midst of a very divided time. But here's some thoughts about a united America, because in the end, I would like to think that we are more united than divided. And what are my thoughts about this? I think I want to kind of end some of this discussion before I start to give you, because I will give you some very practical recommendations at the end of this presentation as to possible ways forward. But before I do that, I want to give you a bit of a vision of where you could be headed. On the left, you see that Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's one of we're calling him the new James Baldwin in many ways. He's a great writer. Just a few years ago, wrote this great piece called, The Case for Reparations. I myself, in 2005, spent some time after looking at the impact of the slave trade, not only on Africa, but also on its diaspora. I spent a whole chapter on the history of reparations, calling for reparations. I'm on record as saying that reparations are due and they should be given. They should be studied as to what form they should take, but they should be given. As this sign says, reparations is a positive solution to economic disparity. We all win. I think, as you know, I think this weekend, President Biden was just talking about it just a couple of days ago, but lots of us and lots of you perhaps have been talking about the fact that the Tulsa race massacre took place June 1, 1921, and that we're in the 100th year. And this was another piece of hidden history for a very long time. This was not taught, just like the weeping time wasn't until very recently as well, taught in our history books, was not taught in our classes, in our schools. You could go through and be very educated and get all kinds of PhDs and masters and all kinds of degrees and not know about the Tulsa race massacre. And I think we're now on that path, that age of repair, if you will, trying to rectify that and tell that story and talk about reparations for this group as well. So when I start to give you this vision, right, of a possible way forward, I want you to think about reparations. I want you to think about the age of repair and the age of equity that we are in now. We are in it, and we're not turning back. Let's think about what role you want to play as a community. Another part of that, and I don't mind, we don't memorialize these places only for money, right? Of course we don't. All the places I've shown you, the motivation behind memorialization had nothing to do with money, but the fact is that you do need money to preserve places, and the people who have suffered as a result of this history also need livelihoods, also need to be supported. So I want to say that Savannah Cultural Heritage Tourism, I mean, everything I've read, it is in excess of 1 billion. Can you imagine, can you dream with me that if in its current state, it's in excess of 1 billion? Can you imagine if just beyond downtown, where great things obviously are happening on the riverfront and so forth. As I said, I spent a lot of time in Savannah, but beyond downtown, you pivot to a place like West Savannah, and you also think of West Savannah as a historic community in which you build it up and develop it. Can you imagine what that would look like? And I want to suggest that you would not be alone. There are cities implementing various kinds of reparations, and they are going down in history. And be clear that reparations is not just dollars. Yes, it's dollars, but it's also repairing this memory. It's also bringing back this history to you and I and to school children so that they know who they are and where we've been and collectively where we want to go. These are some of the cities that are doing it right now. Do you want to add Savannah to the list? I wish you would. I encourage you to. And now as I come to a close, I'm doing okay in terms of time. I like to watch my time, but I want to share just a little bit with you of some practical ways forward. And I want you to really look at this and think about it very, very carefully. And I'm speaking to all. First, let me just say, as you can see from what I've shared in terms of my background, I don't have a dog in this fight, as the expression goes. I'm trying to come in as much as possible as a neutral party, hopefully lending to some kind of conflict resolution in this particular situation. As much as possible, bringing my scholarship and my knowledge of what's going on around the world. Again, this is what I do. This is what I do every day, is watch the patterns and read the tea leaves, if you will, of what's happening around the world. And that's why I can come to you and say, I strongly would suggest a moratorium and attempts at reaching consensus through conflict resolution. I want to say that all parties, I would like you to consider doing this, voluntarily come to the table, whether it's the city of Savannah, meaning the mayor of Savannah, the city council, whether it's the Salvation Army, whether it's these community groups, coalition groups, other groups as well. I would like you to consider coming to the table and trying to resolve this in a way that you can reach some consensus, keeping in mind a lot of what I've said. I want to say to the Salvation Army in particular, I want to say that I'm very familiar with what you do. I think, of course, you do amazing work all over the country. And of course, especially here in Georgia. I want to ask you to consider during this moratorium voluntarily seeking another alternative site. You see, there are many places where you can put a homeless shelter or a shelter for those who need transitional housing. But there is only one site and one place where you can put the Weeping Time Memorial and look at the entire area. As I've said, look at the entire area as a place of historical wealth and richness. It's a great service that you have given to Georgia and the nation. And it's in that spirit, Salvation Army, that I'm asking you to give an even greater service to honor those who came before, whose fates were changed in this very community. Their tears are all over West Savannah. Let me say that again. Their tears, the tears of the enslaved in the Weeping Time slave auction, are all over West Savannah. That's why they called it the Weeping Time. Those tears did not stop at any property line. This is where their lives were changed forever. Please, I know you come with the best of intentions. I know that your heart is for populations in need. Your work is well known to one and all. I ask you to consider and allow this community to properly honor the sacrifice and the resilience of the enslaved of the Weeping Time with a site of memory, with a focus on uplift. I think if you do so, you'll be an example to the nation and the world, in this age of repair, in this age of equity. I have these other recommendations here. Section 106 of National Historic Preservation Act. I've done a lot of work, part of my job is to research things. So I've been researching a lot about the National Historic Preservation Act. And my understanding is that that is one of the things you're to be looking at, is area of potential effects. And I'm not saying you're not looking at it, but I'm saying, look again, go deeper. There are needs assessments that have been done of this community. A number of them I've read, old ones and new ones, community plans. And yes, it is true that there have been, on some of those assessments, there have been, people have said it would be good to have drug and rehab, or it'd be good to have some transitional housing. But by far, the greatest needs that I've seen on those needs assessments has been housing and retail and employment, by far, from what I've seen and what I've read. So again, I think maybe looking at that needs assessment might be another way to look at this. And then finally, I'd like you to consider putting the Weeping Time on the National Register. Let me just say this. On the National Register, only 2% of the sites on the National Register have anything to do with African American history. Did you hear me? Shall I say that again? 2% on the National Register. So that tells you again the importance of trying to do this? And would you, in the end, consider and convert all of West Savannah as a cultural heritage corridor and reparations initiative? Now, to do that, you're all going to have to come together. To do that, you're all going to have to come together and consider, like some of the towns of Evanston or Providence, Rhode Island, even Bristol, England, where a lot of slave trading took place, by the way, are considering their whole towns as areas in which they are going to both commemorate this history and at the same time bring cultural heritage, put cultural heritage on the map and reparations on the map. So come together, folks. And I think perhaps this is the best way for me to end this presentation. I think we all know the song Kumbaya, and I don't know how many of you know this, though. I know obviously some of you do. That Kumbaya is actually, here it is, that camp song. We think of it as a camp song, known around the world as a camp favorite. Song of peace, song of community, song of coming together. But how many of us know that this was a Gullah Geechee song? And Henry Wiley was taped by folks from the Library of Congress in 1926 singing this song. And he is from the Darien area. And Gullah Geechee were never given the credit for Kumbaya. Everybody and his brother has sung this song and gained much from the singing of it too, as you can imagine, because it's a worldwide favorite. And only in the last couple of years, and we want to thank Reverend Griffin Lotson for that, from Darien, brought this to light, fought for this to be given its proper due and credit as a Gullah Geechee song. Doesn't that speak to what we're talking about today? Almost 100 years later it took before a song that people made money, plenty of money on. So many stars and others would sing this song, and no credit came to the Gullah Geechee community. I don't know if you see the theme that I'm sharing here, and yet the song itself is about coming together. It's about peace. It's about reconciliation. And I want to kind of just end with playing 2 seconds of it so you can hear it as it was sung in its original in 1926. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there and say one word before we open it up to questions, because I'm very much looking to have a Q&A and to hear from you, the hosts, and to maybe answer some further questions. Let me just say that song, Kumbaya, the verse is, someone's crying, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's crying, Lord, Kumbaya. Oh, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, Kumbaya. Someone's praying, Lord, Kumbaya. Oh, Lord, Kumbaya. Thank you very much. It's an honor to share with you, and I look forward to this continuing dialogue.
Hello, Doctor. How are you doing?
I am well, thank you. I am well.
Awesome presentation. We appreciate you giving it. And Dr. Toure stepped out. And so, he left me like a usual warrior, HVJ warrior would do. There he is. He pops up because he heard.
Well, because again, I'm going to say this right here. because what Reverend Smalls and what y'all told me, because you know how it is with me. But I will go and say this, Dr. Bailey, we appreciate the presentation. But I have a question for you based on something that you're involved in, because you are part of the Truth and Reconciliation, I think you said coalition. There's a question that was posed in 2020, August of 2020. An article came out and the question was posed. They said, do we need to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the United States? So that's what I'm curious about that. What's your perspective on that?
Great question. Short answer, yes. And I've been calling for it ever since my knowledge. I also teach about South Africa, knowledge of the Truth and Reconciliation Panel, the commission that they had after the period of apartheid. And it was one of the best ways to deal with the 40, 50 years of apartheid and all the atrocities, all the difficulties. It was one of the best ways to also help the community to come together. And many people think that the reason that South Africa is not a powder keg is because they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Would that we had done so in the United States after the Civil War? I think we'd be having very different conversations right now. But hindsight is 2020, and there are folks like myself and others who are doing it in our community. So we're doing it at Binghamton University. We're doing it in Binghamton, New York, in upstate New York. And we believe other communities, and I think some of the ones that I've identified that are doing reparations and considering reparations, that's really what they're doing in many ways, is they're doing truth and reconciliation. Those communities are coming together because they're acknowledging where they have been, bravely acknowledging where we've been, and deciding that they want a different and a better future. So thank you for that. It's a good question.
I have a question. I have a statement because it was something powerful that you said. And I think it was when you said that there's only one place that you can put the Weeping Time Memorial, but you can put the Salvation Army anywhere. And that was powerful, I think. Very powerful.
I want to say, and I want to, part of doing truth and reconciliation work is that we try our best not to demonize anyone, okay?
Correct.
Part of doing this work, which I've been doing for what feels like 30 years now, is that we ascribe, I give the benefit of the doubt of the best intentions. And certainly with the Salvation Army, which has been doing this work for about a century, we know that this is good work. We know it's also needful. But the question is, where is it needful? And I've also did, and I've done this work before, but definitely in preparation for this event, I've looked at all these studies of where you put homeless shelters. And 201, they seem to suggest that if you put homeless shelters in places which are already underserved, vulnerable, in terms of economics and so forth, that first of all, even without the weeping time, there's less opportunity for that shelter, even doing good and great work, to be as successful as they would like to be and to serve the community in the best way that they would like to be. It makes a certain amount of sense when you read these studies that if you put a shelter in a place which is already doesn't have a hospital, doesn't have retail, a lot of retail, doesn't have, but is working towards it, because I think the good people of West Savannah are working towards those things, but it doesn't have those resources yet, that you then are going to, it decreases the opportunity to do as well as you would like to do. And then again, as you've said, and as I said, there's only one place. There's no other, there's nowhere else that you can go and say, the weeping time took place here in West Savannah. There's nowhere else. There's nowhere else. That's why it's nice to have the Holocaust Museum in DC, but 2.3 million visitors a year go to Auschwitz in Poland. 2.3 million. They go to the place where it took place. It's sacred ground. And I ask you, those of you who are listening, to hear it from that point of view, from that larger perspective, that there's only one place and perhaps only one opportunity to make this right.
Dr. Toure?
And I was going to follow up with something that you had shared, Dr. Bailey, that, and not only with South Africa did they have the Truth and Reconciliation, but they also had it in Rwanda. So when you talked about Rwanda, I'm like, yes. And in fact, Rwanda right now, they have a large number of women who are not politicians.
Yes, excellent point.
And so when we look at Savannah, that's again, so we have African American women who are politicians who are making a foray with regard to trying to change the dynamics. And I tell folks that's what we have to do. We have to have conversations, and that's what has occurred. We have not had the true conversations. It's been conversations in a vacuum that have been with people, not the people who have been marginalized. And that's why for work, I'm like saying yes, because that's something that I teach people about truth and reconciliation and how do we address the humanity of people and to rectify it.
Absolutely. The essence, I'm so glad you mentioned Rwanda because again, if you think about the continent of Africa, and there are various places which are struggling, Rwanda is not one of them. It's an interesting thing that happens after truth and reconciliation. After truth and reconciliation, there's something, it's not just a dollars and cents thing, but I think there's a connection between the ways in which people start to connect with one another, the possibilities that they see in one another that they didn't see before, that opens up even economic success and win-win opportunities, as opposed to I win, you lose, you win, I lose. I'm all for it. And I think other countries are doing it, other places are doing it. It takes a lot of bravery, though. It takes a lot of courage.
We have a question from John McMasters. He says, shouldn't other groups have recognized the importance of the site? All of the examples you shared were carefully curated. Visit Savannah should have led the way. No.
What do you mean? What do you mean shouldn't? I'm trying to understand. What do you mean shouldn't other groups? Meaning other, I'm not sure what he means. Meaning, because I will tell you that lots of different people have reached out, and I've heard. I mean, I certainly have been keeping in contact to see, keeping in the news to hear what, who is interested in this and who's, so I'm not sure. I haven't heard from folks in Visit Savannah, but I welcome. And again, I said can't mention everybody, but I welcome all the different groups, who are interested in this site and interested in looking at West Savannah as a cultural heritage corridor. I think you should be a part of the discussion and the conversation. Again, I said very clearly that I am not making an endorsement from one group versus another group. That's not my role. Those, who gets to do the memorializing, who gets to do the no. That's not my role. And the people who invited me know very well that I'm coming and giving as best as I can an objective view of this in a larger context to tell you that this is worth doing and you will not regret it. You will not regret it. You're going to put, Savannah's already on the map, but you're going to double, triple, quadruple put them on the map. And I'd love to see it.
Dr. Small said, should this be preserved less than other places because we didn't know?
That's a really good question. Reverend Small. I mean, I think one of the things that is saddening, and I will tell you this if we have time, I'll tell you my own personal story about this, is that when people say, well, I just found out a year or two ago, or just within the last 5 years, and maybe they've been living or working in the community for a long time, through no fault of their own. The fact that people are just, even at the sound of my voice, are just finding out today, some for the first time, through no fault, whether you're Black, white, Asian, whatever you are, through no fault of your own, says more about our school system, says more about exactly what happened in Tulsa, that for 100 years, people were getting educated in Tulsa, living in the actual areas and around the areas, knew nothing. It just speaks to the importance of public history, not just what we do in the classroom, because we know that that's deficient and we're working on it. We're working on it, believe me. That's why I do what I do, and many others do it even better. But public history, public memorials brings that home to everybody, exposes it to everybody. And imagine some of your millions of tourists that come through Savannah. And trust me, they will come for this, just like they go to Auschwitz. They will come. They will come. You build it, they will come. You turn this into a tasteful, classy, cultural heritage corridor, which speaks to adversity and also speaks to resilience. They will come, because there's something about that any human being can relate to. We've all known some kind of adversity, maybe not like that, but we also strive towards resilience and hope and a feeling of there's a better day. Show that, Savannah. Show people that. Show it to them. Don't hide it. Don't hide it away or cover it over or paper it up. Show it to them. Let them see themselves in you. Let them see themselves in you. And go and tell the story of Savannah the way I'm telling the story of all these other places right now. And people will. Trust me, they will.
She said, is there a way to access the slides after the show?
I would say at this point, if you would contact, I think, Hello Neighbor and Reverend Small, and we can have a conversation about that. Absolutely, depending on what your plan is and your hope is to do with them.
Okay, I was just posting all the thank yous for your presentation. There's so many of them. I don't know whether I'm gonna be able to get to all of them. But Professor Toure, you can probably close it out. We appreciate you, Dr. Bailey, for all that you do. While Dr. Toure is giving his closing, then I'll post the rest of the comments up here. But we thank you.
And again, to reiterate what my brother Julius Hall has said, we thank you, Dr. Bailey. And I think that is something that the listening audience and viewing audience should take in, that with regard to, yes, Savannah needs to look at having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or program here right now, one that is honest and real, because when we deal with it, you must have honest dialogue. The disparities that have gone on for generations, for a century or better, and we need to reconcile that now so we can have a better Savannah. That's what this is about, a better Savannah. There's a show called Better Savannah, and that's what it's about. It's about us having a better Savannah for all of us. And we thank you for that. And I'm glad you brought that up. And again, showing that when we now are involved and honest, we see a better community. And we want the best community. And we thank you again for that. And the conversation will continue on the Ravel at 7 o'clock with the panel. And so again, Dr. Bailey, we thank you. And we say, welcome to Savannah once again, even though you're not here physically, but we know you're coming back after COVID.
I'll be back. I will be back. Please, I look forward to it. I so miss not being there last year, as I'm there pretty much every year. Thank you.
Thank you
again. To our host, Julius Hall, Dr. Toure, it's been my pleasure and honor.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. We appreciate you, Doc. And we'll talk with you later.
Dr. Bailey, as you know, the best high school in Savannah, Chatham County, Georgia, Herschel B. Jenkins High School. Thank you. You got on your red. You got your red on, so you fit right in with us. That's right.
Yeah, you sure do. I don't know whether he called you and told you to put that red on or what. But you should have blue and white on.
You need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for that, too.
No,
okay, Dr. Bailey.
It's just the truth. It's just the truth. We ain't got to reconcile. It's just the truth.
God bless.
God bless you. All right. Jamar, okay, I can put the rest of these up while you close out and give your closing for this.
That's what okay, I'll go ahead and close on out, but that's what we're doing. To our community, to us in Savannah, you heard the word. Some have been saying this, not just yesterday, been saying this for decades. We have to have an honest conversation, and that people get so offended when you now have elected officials who are asking, we need to have a truth and reconciliation. They don't say it in those words, but with regards to what has happened here, the disparities. The only way that we're going to improve as a community is by us now being honest about it and having an honest dialogue, and then going forward with regards to the steps and the policies. I've heard our councilwomen go and say often, we got to change the policies. They are absolutely correct, and we can no longer make excuses. If we're going to have a better community, have a better Savannah, have a better Chatham County, we must have an honest dialogue, and we need leadership to step up to the plate and listen to the citizens. Yes, again, we say thank you, and run tell that. Run tell that. Spread the word.
Tell that. That's right. Run tell that. Spread the word, like the good doctor say. We invite you all to watch at 7 o'clock 7:05 rather. We'll be on at about 7:10. About 7:10 we'll be on with the rabble. Y'all watch the rabble. We have a wrap up show and talk about this presentation and what's the next steps for where we go from here. And I guess somebody will give us an update on the archaeological study that's being done. I can't get all these comments up, but we appreciate all of you for watching. We ask that you share with everybody. You can go on and watch the rerun of this on All Things Relevant Media on Facebook. You can catch it on my Facebook page tonight. You can also catch it on ATR Black Media Network. Those are the three ways that you can see it. We ask that you share. Stay tuned for the rabble.
I just throw something out there also, Brother Julius, and we can no longer be fearful anymore. Tell your elected officials what your thoughts are, your sentiments. Stop being fearful and taking it and having them take it personal. Let them understand that you are the reason why they're in office. That you are the reason why, and no longer be fearful. Go and let them know also what's going on and your sentiments about this, and that you will not sit idly by, because what has happened, the question was posed, or statement was made that yes, around the world, people are reckoning this right now and they're addressing it, but they realize in Savannah, for some of us, we will forget. Do not forget. Let your elected officials know what's going on and your sentiments and go forward.
That's right. So with that being said, we're going to say good night. Stay tuned. Same station right here. We'll be on for our wrap-up presentation. It's the Rabble every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m. with the Rabble. We'll see you on the other side. Good night.